Oh, is this about people leaving Windows? And okay, you know what? For many less tech-savvy people, understand the options they have to leave Windows can be overwhelming. So after almost 2 decades of familiarity with Apple products, this video will hopefully help some people, help some beginners decide whether or not an Apple product is right for their computing needs. The main issue with Apple, and I think this is the reason why it doesn't usually come up with the conversation. It's like, oh, I'm gonna leave Windows, therefore I'm gonna go to Linux. Is Apple has a very high barrier to entry. It is very expensive. Now, yes, you can build a Hackintosh. You could in the past. Nowadays, because they're not supporting Intel systems anymore, I don't think... I think you can still do modern Mac, but that's obviously going to stop at some point. That's usually why it's not part of the conversation. But I'm curious to see what this person has to say.
The idea of leaving Windows is not a new concept. And while there are dozens of solutions for alternative operating systems on the market, both between Linux and in some particular circumstances even Android, there
Android's less of an option. Usually it's gonna be Chrome OS if it's not if it's not Linux.
has been one company that has been hot on the heels
one, yes.
of Microsoft since the very beginning. Apple was founded in 1976, 1 year after Microsoft in 19...
There is a very, like, if you talk to people who are tech people in their, like, 50s and 60s, they have such a different opinion of Apple, because Apple back in, like, the 80s and the 90s, they were, like, they were, like, the kings of consumer computers.
1975. So in a lot of ways, Apple has been Microsoft's competition for about 50 years. But let's take a look at that market share. Why is it that Apple is so far behind when it comes to desktop market share? Especially
because it costs about $3,000 to be on the desktop.
When they clearly have the phone market completely won over. This is one of those topics with a lot of layers to it. But ultimately, our goal here today will be to discuss how viable of an alternative. And
I think the difference with phones is Apple had that first mover's advantage. Apple managed to get that early iOS adoption. And early on, iPhones weren't crazy expensive. Yes, like, top-end smartphones have always cost a lot. But buying an iPhone up until, I don't know, like 2015 or so, it was a top-end phone, but it wasn't an impossibility. So if you were the kind of person who was interested in buying top-end phones back then, you, like, an iPhone or whatever Galaxy was out at the time, like, those were both reasonably competitive in price.
Apple product might be...
Also, bubbles. People are really weird about bubbles in the US.
in your personal situation so that you can leave Windows. And speaking of products, that is actually the perfect place for us to start. If we take a broad look at the business model of both Microsoft and Apple, a clear distinction can be made, at least for this turn of the century, being that for a long time there, Apple primarily sold hardware and software, whereas Microsoft was mostly focused on software. These days, Microsoft does have some sort of hardware offering, but that's its own level of complexity, and we don't need to touch that for today. So let's focus on what Apple is selling. Walking into any electronics store or browsing any online retailer will reveal that Apple kind of comes with a bit of a premium, an Apple tax, if you will. And that premium can turn a lot of people away. Believe it or not, it used to be even worse. So let's take a look under the hood and see what's on offer.
When was this
here.
recorded? Don't worry, it's gonna get worse. Don't you worry when Apple has to start dealing with RAM prices after they work through their backlog. Don't you worry, it's gonna get worse again.
Primary places that Apple rips you off is with storage being your SSD and RAM being your memory. And once again, this used to be even worse back in the day when you were ripped off for your CPU's performance as well. We're going to come back to that particular point later. But believe it or not, what's available out of the box for an Apple product today is actually pretty good. That's because it used to be that the default configuration for a Mac was actually 8 gigabytes of RAM.
What's the context of this title? It's about people leaving Windows, and he's like discussing whether or not Apple is a viable option here.
RAM or memory.
Well, sorry,
Configuration for a Mac was actually 8 gigabytes of RAM or memory, which phones were doing back then, and for less. Storage is still starting at 256 gigabytes, which is almost nothing for a desktop computer.
That's because they want you to buy the cloud storage. That's why.
But that's an improvement over 128 gigabytes. Yeah, that's also a common thing in phones at that time as well.
Yeah.
And the prices to upgrade through Apple are still absolutely ridiculous. So why not just upgrade those parts yourself? Well, Apple thought of that. So these days, if you open up your MacBook, everything is soldered to the motherboard, meaning that nothing is designed to be taken off and replaced by you. This is in direct comparison to the old days where Apple used to have designs which allowed you to upgrade your own memory and your own storage as much as you wanted. So let's take a look at the competition. We see brands...
Yeah, again, Apple used to be a company that people really liked. And this wasn't even that long ago, to be honest. Like, even in the early 2000s.
Offering more storage and RAM for less than Apple is offering in their own products. Except all of that comes with one glaring big problem. It ships with Windows. But it's very easy to see how someone who isn't as tech savvy might walk into a store and be completely put off by the Apple markup and prefer to just get something that seems more affordable. So that market share is starting to make a little bit of sense now. But here's something to consider. If you were to buy a brand new MacBook Pro and a Windows laptop for a little bit less, which one would still be running in 10 years? And I'm not just talking barely booting, I'm talking actually functional and somewhat usable for modern tasks today.
Yeah, so I actually had a 2012 MacBook, or a 2012 MacBook Pro until 2018, maybe? And the only reason I got rid of it is because I didn't want to keep using macOS. That's basically the only reason.
Naturally, there will be people who have experienced the complete opposite in this scenario.
And especially modern devices. There was this video that I saw the other day that was sent to me. It's using a 5-year-old laptop in 2026. So it was a laptop from 2021. How usable is a 5-year-old laptop? Very is the answer.
And I can only hope that those people are being genuine and not just rallying behind an operating system for the sake of nostalgia, even though that operating system gets worse with literally every update. But here's an example of how over a decade's worth of MacBook usage could look. It starts with a white MacBook back in 2008. This Mac
I had one of those.
a spinning disk hard drive, meaning that there's a disk spinning extremely fast with a really sensitive head.
No, it's
that
fine.
reads
I can
the
fix
data
it.
off that disk.
It's not a problem.
This isn't a problem for desktops most of the time, so long as you're not throwing your desktops around.
Yeah, there was this fun idea of putting spinning discs in portable devices. That was a good time. The original iPod had a spinning disc. What a great idea that is.
But laptops get thrown around, and the delicate little components inside a hard...
Oh, they definitely... Oh my god, man. So my school had MacBooks for all of the students, and you don't know how fucking disrespectful high school students are with devices they don't own. People would just chuck their bags with the laptop in it. They would chuck the laptop You don't know how many devices I saw whenever I went to like the IT office. They had fucking stacks of destroyed MacBooks. Like tens of thousands of dollars of MacBooks.
Hard drive will easily die if hit the wrong way or hit.
Yeah, Chromebooks, exact same. But at least generally those are cheaper. At the bare minimum.
Enough times. And that's what failed the white MacBook, which would have failed any laptop in the same situation. So that turned into a 2011 MacBook Pro. And this also started out with a hard drive, but as mentioned before, this was one of those models where you could upgrade it yourself. Pretty handy. So it got upgraded to an SSD. So why aren't you seeing that on screen? Well, that's because another company got involved with the design of this MacBook. NVIDIA collaborated with Apple to have 2 GPUs, or graphics processing units, on this MacBook Pro model. Meaning that when the system wasn't using a lot of graphics resources, it could just use the built-in GPU with the Intel CPU. But when it needed more horsepower, it could switch over to the NVIDIA GPU and provide that. Except there was a fault with the NVIDIA GPU. And there was no way Intel and AMD GPUs.
I don't remember that happening.
Apple works just fine with them.
Maybe I had a slightly later model that fixed that problem. Because I don't remember that being a thing.
So that's what Apple stuck with. This 2015 MacBook model has just an Intel CPU and GPU inside it, and comes with an SSD. And regardless of the fact that this thing has been beaten up a lot, it still runs extremely well and is still used today for some pretty good tasks, including recording the audio for this video. This is also the last MacBook model before some absolute genius at Apple decided to rip off all the usable ports off the next model of MacBook so that you had to buy extra dongles just to plug in all your accessories because none of your
I love whenever I hear, do you remember when the Steam machine first got announced? There were a bunch of Apple people being like, why does the Steam machine have USB-A ports? Why is not every port a USB-C? Fuck off. Like, everybody else operates in the normal PC space where we have ports. We don't use dongles for everything.
Accessories had USB-C at the time. It was
no, the new one. Why the original Steam machines didn't have the USB-C wasn't a thing back then. USB-C didn't exist for like 10 years when the original Steam machines came out.
It's being slowly adopted, but not quite that fast. Also, this was the time they got rid of the headphone jack as well. Are we noticing a trend? But
buy their headphones, the Bluetooth.
At least
okay, technically the AirPods don't use Bluetooth on Apple devices. They have like a custom protocol that does magic custom protocol things.
Apple had the cojones to backtrack on one of those decisions. I don't think we'll ever see a headphone jack on an iPhone. That would take courage. But back to this MacBook. The fact that it's still running today is extremely impressive, especially when companies are actually designing their products with planned obsolescence in mind. So what about those cheaper Windows laptops? Naturally, the first thing to go on a Windows laptop is Windows. It doesn't matter if your laptop runs perfectly with Windows 7 or Windows 10. Microsoft is pushing you to upgrade to Windows 11 so that they can track.
I will say that Apple does do a quite good job at keeping their devices feeling fast. Now, sometimes that involves doing some battery shenanigans. However, they do a relatively good job at keeping the devices feeling fast.
You more to train their AI and sell that data to advertisers. And all that extra bloatware requires resources, which your older laptops might not have and honestly shouldn't need. You shouldn't need extra resources in your laptop just to sell your data. So the elephant in the room is, why not just install Linux on that old laptop? And you were absolutely 100% right in thinking that. In fact, most old pieces of hardware can be resurrected simply by wiping Windows.
Hear me out. The M4 MacBook Pros apparently having Wi-Fi issues that are caused by using Bluetooth. So a lot of the time, I assume Apple does the same thing. You have a combo Wi-Fi Bluetooth. So it's like the same chip, which is why that would probably be happening.
and installing a Linux distribution. Some of them can run even the most modern Linux distributions, and there are even Linux distributions out there designed specifically to run.
Of all the discs you pick Ubuntu.
On older hardware.
Ubuntu's not the best. I wouldn't even put Ubuntu on an older device, really. If I was going to put something on, it depends how old the device is, because frankly, a lot of devices, Fedora is probably fine.
So it doesn't have to be trash just because Microsoft made it so. But that's not the focus
Fedora
of
KDE
this video.
specifically, not
And
workstation.
as much as this is a viable solution, nothing quite beats having the right operating system installed on the right hardware out of the box, especially if we're talking about usability for less tech-savvy people. But another edge that Apple has here is their research and development, or R&D. Your average MacBook these days is actually pretty well designed. There are exceptions to this, such as every MacBook between this one and up until the MacBook just before the M1 was released. And yes, repairability is still completely out the window, even the EU pushing Apple to make things more repairable. And don't get me started on thermals.
Oh, that's another one. There's a lot of people who argue that the EU regulations have actually held back Apple, because guys, if Apple wasn't forced to use USB-C, then we'd have these amazing MagSafe chargers. I guess people don't realize that people have made magnetic USB-C. Magnetic USB-C has been a thing for a long fucking time. You can absolutely do that. They just don't want to. You have to ship out every broken Mac instead of fixing them ourselves at work. Yeah, that's fun. Magnetic USB-C is not a spec, but it's still USB-C. You can make it happen. You can include a little magnetic dongle. You can just do that.
Does not mean better. I think they're learning that the hard way with the iPhone Air. But if we look at what other laptop manufacturers are doing, they certainly don't have the same R&D as Apple. And they might argue that that's because they're not going to ship as many units, so there's no point putting that into R&D. So at least you can see where your Apple tax is going. But speaking of R&D, another partnership that ended with Apple was their one with Intel. Thanks to Intel putting absolutely no effort into their R&D for many, many years, and instead putting a plus on the end of their old CPUs and calling it a new product, Apple was...
They dropped the ball so fucking... I don't know what Intel's been doing the past fucking decade. Like, ever since Ryzen came out, they were just like, I don't... Guys, what do we do? Like, look at this fucking chart. This is a year... Sorry, no. This is a year and a half. Firstly, I don't know why people are still... I feel like a lot of these Intel systems that are here are people with just older Intel systems. But, like, how have they dropped the ball so hard, letting AMD just fucking take over the CPU space? I don't know what they're doing. Are Intel GPUs still a thing? Technically.
Sick of the stagnation and decided they'd make their own CPU. To be fair, they had this in the pipeline for a little while, as the new M series of CPUs was actually being developed in the iPhone for all these years.
Yeah, okay, cool, you mentioned it. Yeah, so the M1 is a modified version of their iPhone chip. So they already were basically doing this already.
So now Intel has to rely on the US government to get them out of financial trouble. But as great as the M series of CPUs are, this leads us to an enormous roadblock when it comes from switching from Windows to Mac. Let's switch back to Intel for a moment and get into the PC gaming DIY building space. If you wanted to build a gaming PC
AMD.
10 years ago, Intel was the way to go.
I would say up until Ryzen. Up until Ryzen, and Ryzen 1 was a little rough. But up until Ryzen, Intel was the option you went with. You went with AMD because you couldn't afford Intel. Now you go with Intel because you're a fucking idiot.
We're at the top of their game.
or you're like, you don't even know that things have changed. AMD is just, I don't even know why you would consider an Intel CPU at this point. I genuinely don't.
Although they were starting to fall off a little bit, and you would put an Intel CPU in there.
Yep.
If you wanted to upgrade that CPU a little bit later, you'd probably end up with an AMD CPU because Intel tapped out and AMD wiped the floor with them thanks to AMD's research and development. But what about your games library? If you have an Intel CPU or an AMD CPU, your games library doesn't care because they're built off the same architecture, which is called x86-64. So you could switch between Intel and AMD 100 times and your games will still run. Apple's new M series chips don't run off the same architecture. They run off ARM architecture, which you will often...
There is a compatibility layer that does exist. It's just obviously going to have some overhead. And Valve's been doing good work when it comes to ARM stuff. So I don't know if people are going to... I know Fex is actually used on the M series Macs for Asahi Linux. So there is definitely more support there than there was in the past.
Find in phones. This is why it's actually an extra hurdle for your super powerful phone to play games that you have on your PC. So even if you got into a time machine today, went into the future 10 years and grabbed a phone that was more powerful than your current gaming PC, you still wouldn't be able to run your games because they're completely different architectures. But if you've watched any of the other videos on this channel, you may have heard of a
Oh, what? Okay, sorry. What a random game to appear. Fairy Fencer F Advent Dark Force. Oh, man. For anyone who doesn't know, that is the other series that the Neptunia developers made. And no one even cares that Fairy Fencer exists, but I love it.
Translation layer called Proton. This is the magic translation layer that Valve created to translate instructions from Windows to Linux. So that we can play our games and get away from Windows once and for all. This translation layer, though, only needs to translate at a software level. When we start translating at a hardware level, being the instructions the CPU needs, and we have to start converting from x86-64 over to ARM, that becomes a problem. Arguably, though, it shouldn't be a problem. Look how much Apple is worth. If Apple really wanted to take gaming seriously, they could invest the time and money into here. And by seriously, I mean they release more than one AAA game per year. Then they could easily obliterate Windows from the market by advertising all of your Steam games working on Mac. But
no. I don't believe for a second that Apple would suddenly get a shitload of market share by having gaming support. It still has the cost barrier to entry. Like, you can say, oh, you're going to have a MacBook for 10 years, but it's still a very big expense. And a lot of people don't know how money works, right? A lot of people, if you say, oh, this is $2,000 for 10 years, or it's $800 every 3 years, for a lot of people, they will make that $800 every 3 years purchase because, firstly, they may not have $2,000 to spend immediately. Secondly, a lot of people, they actually can't think about things over a long period of time, and their entire understanding is based on what is immediately in front of them.
Apple doesn't seem to understand development in the gaming world. See, they've made a translation layer that is for developers to make a Mac port. You know, the same developers that are already subject to crunch, deadlines that are being moved up, unfair working conditions, and then even if they make a good game, they get let go at the end. You know, those guys who are working stupid hour weeks, they totally have time to make a Mac port. But Valve understands. So Valve's translation layer requires no extra work from the developer. In fact,
mostly. There are little things they can do here and there to make games work nicer with Proton, but it's not like you need to reinvent the game. It's more like, don't do stupid shit.
In fact, some developers will put in extra work to break.
Yeah, like, so, like, don't use weird proprietary codecs and things like that.
Break it on Linux, but we've already covered that. So imagine a world where Apple put in the same work. And they could, but they've chosen not to.
Valve also
so there's
already
another
did.
reason
It's
why
called
this market
Fex.
share doesn't look as good
How does he
as
not know
you
about
think
Fex
it
and he's
would
doing
from
this
a
video?
company worth this much. One thing that Apple doesn't need to worry about anymore is the original argument, being that Apple is locked down and Windows provides unprecedented freedom. In fact, they're almost the opposite now. Mac OS seems to provide more freedom than Windows these days. Did you know you can make a local offline account on a Mac and you don't need to plug it into the internet and sign in with an online account like Windows demands you do? Oh, and you don't need to
You actually can still do that on Windows. It's just awkward.
use a terminal to do it either. It's an out-of-the-box feature.
Imagine that.
So with that all being said, if you don't care about gaming and you know that your favorite apps are going to work on Mac, because a lot of apps have both a Windows and Mac.
That is one thing I will give Mac. A lot of stuff is available on Mac because Mac is a... The other thing is, like, if you've bought a Mac, you're more likely to buy software. So it makes sense for a lot of developers to port their paid software over to Mac.
Version these days, then it could potentially be a viable option for you if you're happy to pay that premium for your Mac to potentially last a little bit longer than most other laptops. But if you're a gamer and you want to support companies that actually have to focus on gaming because it's their bread and butter, then it's probably better for you to build your own PC. And as we've mentioned, you don't need to install Windows on it. You can install any of these and you will have a much better experience.
Maybe not this one. Tuxedo. What a random choice to include.
However, there's one final thing to consider. And we touched on this in the last video. If you buy a MacBook, you are giving money to a $1 trillion publicly traded company that answers to shareholders. And as much as leaving Windows is a very good thing, and
if you buy a laptop from any company, you're doing that. It's just probably less. It's probably not trillions in most cases. It's probably going to be billions.
Everyone should be thinking about doing that, you might be trading one villain for another. And while Apple certainly is the lesser of two evils, they are also the company that has taken away features from their hardware in the past, so you had to pay more money. So while their products today are very good, who knows what tomorrow might bring? It's always a gamble with too big to fail companies. Whereas on the other hand, not only could you potentially build a PC if you were interested, and install something that isn't Windows or Mac, or buy a Windows laptop and wipe Windows from it to install something else. But there are even laptops today that ship without Windows or Mac OS. The key difference here is that almost every one of these other solutions is supporting free and open source software, or FOSS, meaning that you're not giving your money to a company that is going to run back to their shareholders, which are going to ask for even more money. But this one is up to you and your own stances when it comes to giving money to big tech companies. So at the end of the day, all you can really do is what's right for you. But whether you end up with a MacBook or a laptop not running Windows and something else, either way, you'll still be in a much better position than using Windows.
That was a neat video.